Good evening to all fans of monster movies. Our film today is called Jack Brooks' Monster Slayer. It tells the story of a weak man who is afraid of his own imagination. However, after the death of his family at the hands of a monster, he decides to become a monster hunter and seek revenge for the death of his family. Let's dive in and see. The film begins with a strange monster that wanted to devour an African tribe. The tribe fought back with all their strength, trying their best to get rid of this monster. However, the monster was incredibly powerful, and they couldn't do anything to stop it. They tried their best to kill it, but it mercilessly killed them one by one. When the tribe realized they couldn't defeat the monster, they quickly escaped before it could finish them off. They then gathered near a tent and called someone from inside to come out and kill the monster. This person is our protagonist, Jack, the reluctant hero of our film. Jack has a sharp eye and a relentless heart. He introduces himself and takes us on a flashback journey to his past, revealing his story and how he became a deadly monster killer. Jack was a failure and couldn't rely on himself. Everything in his life was a struggle, and he had no control over himself. It was all because of his troubled childhood, which had the biggest influence on his life. During that time, Jack was very aggressive and would mercilessly beat anyone he encountered without any mercy or remorse. Later, we see his teacher punishing him by making him run because he falsely accused his friend and hit him in the face with a ball, almost breaking his nose. After the punishment, the coach brings him to apologize to the student he had hit. Then, in the locker room, Jack destroys everything in frustration due to the punishment he received and the humiliation of having to apologize. Moving further into the past, we see Jack with his parents and sister in the backyard of their house, enjoying a beautiful time together, dancing and cherishing each other's company with love and joy. However, when Jack's sister moved away towards the forest, a monstrous creature swiftly emerged from within the forest, leaving Jack frozen in place, unable to move. Jack's parents rushed towards his sister in an attempt to save her, but the monster attacked her mercilessly, biting her neck, causing a profuse bleeding. Despite his father's efforts to save her and fight off the monster, the creature overpowered him, delivering a fatal blow. It continued devouring Jack's sister until she died. And the monster didn't stop there. It also devoured Jack's mother, who died as well. Then, it turned to attack their father, and Jack's father pleaded with him to run away from the forest to save his own life at least. Jack ran as fast as he could through the forest, trying to escape from the pursuing monster. He managed to distance himself from it, finding a hiding spot where he could evade the creature and preserve his life. Afterwards, Jack grows up and reaches his 20s. He visits his psychiatrist, who helps him overcome his aggression and teaches him how to control himself. Jack's life has changed for the better, leaving behind his violent tendencies. However, the psychiatrist notices that Jack's hand is injured and asks him about it. Jack tries to come up with an excuse, claiming that he accidentally hurt himself. But when the psychiatrist presses him further, he realizes that Jack had hit someone who had provoked him and made him lose control. Jack becomes agitated in front of the psychiatrist, shouting, and eventually storms out, telling the doctor to find him when he has free time since he seems busy at the moment. Then, Jack gets in his car and heads to his school, where he attends science classes. However, he arrives late as the class is coming to an end. He joins the remaining part of the lesson and sits next to Eve. She asks him why he's late and reminds him that they agreed to attend class together and never waste any time. Jack pays no attention to her and remains focused on the science teacher's explanation. The science teacher was discussing the reaction of sodium with hot air, and everyone in the class is engaged except for Jack. He is preoccupied with his crush, hoping to gain her approval. But Eve interrupts him, scolding him for not paying attention to the science lesson. As the class ends, Eve scolds Jack again for being consistently late and breaking his promise to focus on his studies. She considers him a failure, and despite his assurance that he will change, she sees no improvement. Then, a white boy approaches them, trying to impress Jack by offering to take Eve home. At that moment, the teacher calls Jack, and he goes to meet him, while the white boy takes Eve with him. The teacher informs Jack that he knows he is skilled at plumbing and asks for his help at his house, where there is a plumbing issue. Jack agrees and goes to the teacher's house. The teacher welcomes him and takes him to the place where the pipes need fixing. Jack tries to identify the problem and, when the teacher hands him a wrench, he tests the sink to see if it works. Jack continues to play around and experiment with the pipes until he causes a leak that floods the garden and creates a hole in the ground. Then, Jack asks the teacher to test the pipes, but they malfunction and explode in Jack's face. The teacher scolds him, saying sarcastically that he did a great job, but now he will solve the problem once he has enough money to pay for the repairs. He asks Jack how much he charges. However, Jack refuses to accept money, realizing that his account is to obtain an excellent grade in science class. The teacher, annoyed, reluctantly agrees. Afterward, Jack drives his car and continues for a few hours until a leak occurs in the garden. The smoke from the reaction penetrates the house and reaches the teacher, who smells it. And as the teacher smelled the smoke, his eyes turned red and strange. He couldn't see clearly and stumbled around like a possessed person. He continued walking until he reached the door and banged his head against it, causing him to bleed. Then he went out to the garden. At that time, Jack was with his psychiatrist, trying to find any method to analyze and control his aggressive behavior. But as usual, Jack gets angry with him, leaves, and walks away. The next morning, the teacher wakes up from the daze he was in and finds himself in the garden, disheveled. He notices the hole that was caused by the leak. He decides to dig deeper to uncover what lies beneath. After digging a large hole, he retrieves a big wooden box from it, filled with soil and a skeletal structure. He continues searching until he finds an old heart inside the box, completely black as if it had been burned by fire. The teacher takes the heart in his hand and feels it beating strangely and remarkably, despite it belonging to someone who should be dead. It takes control of his hand, and he tries to remove it, but without success. Suddenly, the heart gains more control, forcing him to place it on his chest. He experiences excruciating pain until the heart reaches his abdomen, causing the teacher to lose consciousness. Then, Jack goes to a plumbing shop and asks the responsible person, named Howard, to give him a replacement for the faulty valve. Howard takes the valve from him, puzzled by its appearance as he has never seen one like it before. He realizes it is made of iron but doesn't understand its nature. Howard asks Jack, "Where do you work as a plumber?" Jack replies, "I work at an old place on Watson Street." As soon as Howard hears the location, he quickly warns Jack not to go there again. He tells him that the place is cursed and filled with extremely dangerous monsters, advising him to stay away. He promises to tell Jack the story of the cursed house when he returns the next day to collect the valve. Jack walks away, confused and surprised by Howard's words, sensing that something strange is happening. Later, we return to the teacher, who wakes up and feels extreme hunger. He starts eating all the food he has in the refrigerator. The following day, Jack and Eve go to their teacher's class together and sit next to each other. While they are sitting together, Jack's crush enters the classroom. Jack engages in conversation with her, confessing that he doesn't know what to do in class but comes there specifically for her, to see her every day. When he sees her, he feels calm and free from any worries. Suddenly, the teacher enters the room, looking extremely strange with an overly obese body from continuous eating. He walks in while holding food in his hand, not willing to let it go. His appearance is grotesque and repulsive, and all the students are surprised and laugh at him. After that, he reaches the board, and one of the students asks him if he's okay. He replies, "Yeah, I'm a little tired, but I'm perfectly fine, and I'll continue with you." Then he takes the chalk and starts writing today's lesson on the board, but he can't control his hand. His hand keeps slipping away from him, making involuntary movements. Suddenly, he jerks back towards the board, causing disgust among all the students. After that, all the students leave the classroom. Then Jack stands with Eve, intending to accompany her and take her home, but the annoying guy who has a crush on Eve interferes. Jack decides to take Eve with him, but the guy stops him. Jack gets angry and punches him in the face, causing him to fall to the ground. Eve gets upset with Jack for hitting anyone who tries to get close to them and asks him to take her home. Jack takes her and escorts her home. Later, the teacher arrives at his house holding a KFC box in his hand, continuously eating without stopping. The dog growls at him due to his unnatural behavior, but he doesn't pay attention and continues eating until he finishes the box. He then goes to the refrigerator, searching for any other food to eat, but it is empty. Suddenly, he starts experiencing severe pain in his body, unbearable agony. Furthermore, something extremely strange happens. The teacher's body starts producing a worm-like creature, resembling intestines, emerging from under his abdomen. It wriggles left and right, surprising the teacher, who takes scissors and cuts it off, throwing it on the ground in a horrifying scene. Afterward, he rushes to another refrigerator in his house, opens it, and continues eating everything inside it voraciously, without any pause. His appearance is repulsive. Then Jack goes to his psychiatrist and informs him that he has decided to emigrate and go to Brazil. The doctor asks, "Why Brazil?" Jack replies, "Because it's far away." The doctor suggests Australia, which is much farther, but Jack insists on going to Brazil, stating that he knows someone who traveled to Australia and found it very boring. However, the doctor knows everything that Jack has been through and asks him to talk about the death of his mother, father, and sister, as Jack has never mentioned them before. Whenever the topic is brought up, Jack refuses to discuss it due to past events. Jack knows that he doesn't want to talk about that matter. The doctor realizes that Jack doesn't want to talk about it because he ran away from that place and didn't care about anything that happened there. He didn't stand by them or defend them. At that time, Jack didn't have any guilt because he was young and unable to do anything. His escape was a natural reaction, not something that would make him blame himself. However, Jack feels that even if he had stayed and died like them, his name wouldn't have meant anything. He would have just been a victim. After that, Jack goes to Howard to collect the iron valve to install it at the teacher's house. When he arrives there, Howard asks why he needs the valve, as he has just woken up and doesn't remember anything. Jack informs him that it's for the house on Watson Street. Howard asks, "The one near the hill?" Jack confirms, saying, "Yes, the one near the hill exactly." However, Howard stops him from going there and says, "Don't go there. Strange things happen there, and whoever enters that house dies because of it." Jack doesn't understand anything and asks Howard to tell him the whole story. Howard says, "I used to live there with my uncle, who was a researcher. He used to bring extremely strange things from around the world. Once, he brought a very small thing, which he had obtained from Japan. I couldn't understand what it was, but it looked like a heart." At that moment, Howard's memories started coming back to him, and he said, "It was kept in a glass container, and I used to go and look at it occasionally because it was something strange and extremely rare. However, when I entered my uncle's office to look at it, he took it out of the wooden box where it was kept and it remained in the glass container. At that time, my uncle entered and asked me, 'What are you doing here?' He told me not to visit there again and warned me, saying, 'I don't want to see you near that heart one day.' Since then, the heart became a memorial monument, but the evil it contained remained unchanged. My uncle bought it from an antique store. One day, there was a lot of smoke in the room where my uncle was, and he inhaled it. From that moment, he started eating in a terrible manner, and the heart began to control him in everything until it came out of its glass container and stayed with him all the time. I knew that one day I saw my uncle outside the house, and he was following him. He found him eating his own dog due to excessive hunger, wanting to eat a lot. When I approached him, he grabbed my hand and bit me. He continued chasing me all over the house to eat me, and I kept escaping from him everywhere until I found a gun and shot him. At that time, everything I did was the right thing to do. After that, I tied him up, took him, and buried the heart with him. After placing him in the box, I locked them both up. Despite all that, the heart was still beating at that time. This was, of course, the same heart the teacher had found because Howard had lived with his uncle in the house near the hill. Then, Jack couldn't believe anything and didn't want to think that what had happened was real, to avoid being afraid and going there. He left Howard behind and walked away. After that, Jack went to the night place where he takes lessons from the teacher and meets Eve there. He stands with her and apologizes for everything that happened between them, explaining that he will change. However, she knew that he would never change due to his aggressive behavior. Whenever he sees her with someone else, he resorts to violence. Then she told him that if she didn't want to see him, he should leave her alone. But he said that he couldn't leave her and go anywhere. After that, they entered the classroom. At that moment, the teacher had his head on the desk and was asleep. He couldn't move. When they tried to wake him up, he lifted his face, and everything on the desk stuck to his face in a strange way. He had gained a lot of weight, and he couldn't see them properly. Whatever came into his hand stuck to it, and he scratched his body hysterically, unable to bear the thing inside him. His weight kept increasing. Suddenly, a girl tried to approach him to understand what was happening to him, but he hit her with his hand and threw her far away at the back of the classroom. After that, he sat on the floor, and large hoses started coming out of his back, exactly like tentacles. These hoses started emerging from his entire body and began to attack all the students, grabbing and pulling them. One student had already reached Jack, but he closed the door and cut him off. Then all the students scattered in different places, and the hoses chased them until one of the hoses managed to catch the guy who was harassing Eve. It grabbed him tightly and pulled him towards it, but not just him, the hose continued to pursue others as well. There were many students whom the teacher managed to pull using his hoses and brought them to the room where he was. His appearance had transformed into a terrifying monster, and his body had turned into a giant beast. All the students present with him stared at him in a hysterical manner, fearful of him. He would grab each one of them and something from his intestines would come out through his mouth, entering the mouths of those he controlled. He would take away all the food and intestines present in his body and devour them voraciously. At that moment, Jack, Eve, and another girl had locked themselves together in a room out of fear of going outside due to the state of the teacher. The teacher, when someone approached him, would transform them exactly like him and attack the remaining students. The wretched boy who had pursued Eve after his transformation would capture the third girl they had with them and devour her. After that, Jack took Eve and escaped with her in a car, while the wretched boy chased them everywhere. The school became chaotic and tumultuous, with everyone terrified due to the transformed individuals. Anyone who was bitten or had any encounter with the teacher would transform just like him and attack other people. But Jack and Eve managed to get into a car and quickly escape from the place. However, in the middle of the way, Jack suddenly stopped the car. Eve said to him, "Are you kidding? Let's run quickly from this place and escape." But Jack remembered the monster that killed his parents. Then Eve ordered him to get out of the car and took it herself, telling him to return with it. He made the decision to go there and kill the teacher himself. He took a large axe in his hand, entered the school, and started killing every transformed person he encountered on his way until he had killed a large number of them. He dealt with them and continued on his way to reach the room where the teacher was and kill him, putting an end to everything. On his way, he encountered the wretched boy who had pursued Eve and killed him, getting rid of him. By that time, the teacher had already captured a significant number of students with him, and he had grown into a gigantic monstrous form. His eyes became bulging and enormous, and all the students present with him were terrified. He would grab them and pull them inside him, devouring them with great greed. Each one still alive would die from fear. After that, Jack managed to enter the room where the teacher was and tried to free all the restrained students. He cut off the hoses that held them and allowed them to escape. The teacher attempted to kill Jack, but Jack possessed great skills and was able to control him. Afterward, several students rose up and attacked Jack, but he managed to deal with them until only Jack and the teacher remained. Here, Jack ran to get an iron rod to strike the teacher with. However, the teacher grabbed his own intestines and wrapped them around Jack's leg. In this moment, Jack managed to pull out a corrosive liquid containing hydrochloric acid from a sodium hydroxide bottle. He took it and inserted it into the monster's mouth until its brain exploded and was severed. Jack thought that everything was over, but the tentacles came back and tightened around him. Then, Jack ran with great speed and grabbed the large axe. With it, he was able to sever the heart inside the teacher. The monster died, and they were finally rid of it forever. Jack was able to save all the people, his friends, and his beloved, whom he had a crush on. From that moment, Jack became a monster slayer and was able to kill the monster in the forest, the one who had been responsible for killing his parents. Since then, he lived among African tribes in the heart of the forests, and they considered him their warrior. Returning to the present, we see them waiting for him while he was sitting inside the tent, and they were waiting for him outside until he emerged and attacked the monster that had been killing their tribe. They finally put an end to it. And here, the film concludes.